Final Fantasy is without a doubt one of the most beloved and recognizable video game franchises of all time, with fans all over the globe growing up with and loving the characters, stories, and especially the music the games had to offer. The franchise is iconic, and the idea of it crossing over with gaming's biggest crossover event in history was, at the time, an impossible dream that so many people dearly hanged on to. The reveal of Cloud was one of the greatest third-party character reveals for a video game ever, and it opened up so many more possibilities about who can be in Smash Bros. Many more characters that seemed impossible now had a chance to be represented. It was truly an incredible time to be a Nintendo and Final Fantasy fan. However, when Cloud was finally released, everyone noticed that something was a bit off. Cloud in Midgard looked incredible, the best they've looked in years, and he was super fun to play. But something seemed rather odd. Cloud only came with 2 music tracks, 3 if you count his remix of Victory Theme. No big deal, right? The other DLC characters came with very few music tracks at all. Well, when Super Smash Bros. Ultimate was revealed and then released, those DLC characters and many other third-party characters were being represented further with a plethora of new tracks, new assist trophies, and a ton of new spirits. Everyone except for Cloud. Why did nothing new get added for Final Fantasy and Ultimate? Was Square Enix stingy with their IP, restricting the amount of content allowed in Smash to begin with? What exactly happened with Cloud in Smash Bros? Today, we explore all the details regarding Cloud's inclusion, Nintendo and Square Enix's relationship, and investigating why there is a major lack of Final Fantasy content in the biggest crossover event in gaming history. My name is Soundwave, and welcome. One of the most prevalent rumors regarding the lack of Final Fantasy content in Smash is that Nintendo and Square have a rocky relationship, which led to Square Enix being hesitant on giving Sakurai a lot of content to work with. But before we talk about their relationship, it's important to note that before Square Enix was Square Enix, the two were separate developers until 2003, where they were merged into one. Squaresoft was one of the most prolific gaming companies during their time. They were known for their major titles such as Final Fantasy, Chrono Trigger, Secret of Mana, and Super Mario RPG.
Super Mario RPG, only on the system that keeps on kicking, Super NES. Dig it?
Enix, on the other hand, is known mainly for their widely successful Dragon Quest IP.
Dragon Quest, すごいドラゴンクエスト、できました。愛がある。冒険がある。人生がある。ドラゴンクエスト5、天空の花嫁。Enix.
In fact, Final Fantasy was very heavily inspired by Dragon Quest. During the time, Square and Enix were seen as heavy competitors in the industry. This was until 2001, where Enix expressed interest in partnering with Square, but became hesitant when Square suffered a financial crisis after the release of their box office failure, Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within. Nonetheless, the two companies would merge into one, officially on April 3, 2003, and be officially renamed into Square Enix. Going back to when the two companies were separate, both companies in the beginning mainly developed their games on Nintendo hardware. Enix would continue to develop for Nintendo up until the merge in 2003, but Square stopped publishing for Nintendo consoles in 1997, where they released their new major title Final Fantasy VII on the Sony PlayStation.
Beyond the edge of reality lies a story of ultimate conquest, a story of war and friendship, a story of a love that can never be, and a hatred that always was. And now, the most anticipated epic adventure of the year will never come to a theater near you. Final Fantasy VII.
But what caused this departure? Well, Squaresoft was one of the many companies that had planned to make games for the new Nintendo 64, but decided against it because of the expensive cost that came with developing for it. CD-based games were cheaper to develop for during the time, and that factor ultimately led Square to develop exclusively for Sony. Square wouldn't publish for Nintendo consoles again until 2003, where they published Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles on the Nintendo GameCube under their new name Square Enix.
Use the crystals to expel the mist that poisons your world. Battle alone or with friends by connecting up to 4 Game Boy Advance systems. Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles, only for Nintendo GameCube.
So we can see that Square and Nintendo had a strong relationship up until the Sony deal. Regarding Square's relationship with Nintendo at the time, many sources claim that the two companies started out very close, but had a falling out because of Square's departure to develop on the PlayStation. And to be honest, their past relationship is still quite a mystery. However, in 2017, new details about their breakup came out in an interview that Polygon had with the many people who had a part in the Final Fantasy series. In the section that covers Square's departure from Nintendo, Executive Vice President Yoshihiro Maruyama stated, "I don't think anyone from Nintendo gave us a hard time," they said. "Oh, we don't need that." That's what they said. Their philosophy has always been that Nintendo hardware is for their games, and if a publisher wants to publish, okay, you can do it, but if you don't like it, we don't want you. Hiroshi Kawai, a character programmer for Square Japan, had this to say, "I'll say this, I'm impressed with what Nintendo was able to do with the 64 hardware. Mario, Zelda, their devs must be top-notch to be able to do that. But that's essentially the extent of what you can do with the hardware, and you will get nowhere near anything like a Final Fantasy running on it." Hironobu Sakaguchi, the creator of Final Fantasy, stated, "When we made our decision, the president of Square, our lead programmer, and I went to a meeting with Yamauchi-san. There is an old cultural tradition where, in Kyoto, someone will welcome you with tea, but you're not supposed to really drink that tea. It's just polite to have it there. And Yamauchi-san welcomed us with a very expensive bento meal and beer, and gave us a very nice welcome and basically patted us on the back to say, 'I wish you the best.' No bitter feelings or anything." And Hiroshi Kawai stated, "What I heard was Nintendo said, 'If you're leaving us, never come back.'" Keep in mind that these are just some of the many statements included in the Polygon interview. If there really was some tension between the two companies, it has more than likely been patched since many Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest titles have been ported over to the Switch. If you haven't noticed, there isn't really any concrete evidence regarding the relationship. Since everyone at Square has their own retelling of past events, it's still quite a mystery, with only speculation to go off of. Smash wasn't the only game to cross over with Square Enix characters. On November 12, 2017, Tekken 7 revealed their newest DLC character Noctis from Final Fantasy XV. And on October 27, 2018, Soul Calibur 6 revealed their most recent DLC character, 2B, from Nier Automata. These two are recent examples of Square Enix crossing over with different video game developers. So what kind of content was added in each game? Well, in Tekken 7, Noctis came with a couple different costumes in the stage Hammerhead, which is the popular gas station and repair shop in Final Fantasy XV. In the stage you can see the other three main characters Ignis, Prompto, and Gladiolus, along with Sid and Cindy and packs of Chocobo in the background. Only 2 songs were added to further represent the game. In Soul Calibur 6, 2B came with only 1 costume, and her stage was City Ruins from Nier Automata, and only 1 music track was added. You can start to see a pattern here. Every guest character of recent came with 1 stage, a couple music tracks, a couple costumes, and nothing more. So did Square Enix have a falling out with Namco as well? Smash Bros. Recently had another crossover with Square Enix in the form of a new fighter Hero from the Dragon Quest franchise. To represent the series, you can actually play as 4 different main characters from the games. 8 songs were added from different Dragon Quest titles. Yggdrasil's Altar from Dragon Quest XI was the new stage, and you can see various enemies from the franchise appear in the background. It looks like Square was more lenient this time around when giving Sakurai permission to use one of their IPs. The most popular theory regarding the lack of Final Fantasy content in Smash is that Square Enix is stingy when it comes to their IPs. But is this really true? Well, many people have speculated that Square Enix doesn't even have full ownership of their own music and characters, and have to pay royalties to the individual artists. So it's not Square Enix who is stingy with their IPs, it's the individual artists and composers you have to thank for the lack of content. Cloud was originally created by Tetsuya Nomura, and the music for Final Fantasy VII was composed entirely by Nobuo Uematsu. If you go to the bottom of the Final Fantasy official portal site, you can see a list of Final Fantasy copyrights. Notice how character design is credited towards Tetsuya Nomura, and how every logo design is credited towards Yoshitaka Amano. Even on the back of Cloud's amiibo box, Tetsuya Nomura is credited. Then this also explains why there aren't any other Final Fantasy VII spirits in general. They are all owned by Tetsuya Nomura. And this is just speculation, but I suspect there's a hefty licensing price for his characters. You can also make the assumption that Nobuo Uematsu asks a pretty high price for his music to be used in other games. Nobuo Uematsu composed for every single Final Fantasy game up until 9 by himself. It wouldn't be a stretch to believe that he owns his own music, or at least a large chunk of it, even after he left Square in 2004 to start his own company. Speaking of Nobuo Uematsu's departure from Square Enix, it's also important to note that he worked with Sakurai in the past by composing for the Super Smash Bros. Series. He did the main theme for Brawl, and that's it. In a 2006 interview from Insider, Uematsu talked about his work on Brawl. Here's a small portion of the interview that focuses on the game. How much involvement did you have with the project? It's actually just the one song, the title song, that I was asked to write, and that was a real surprise. Very nice to have that opportunity. I didn't think it was really going to be a big deal, but it was really fun to work with and it turned out really good. So are there any plans for you to do more songs for the game? If Sakurai asks me, I'll do anything. There isn't really an actual plan, but in Japan we're going to do something. I'll work with Sakurai again, we just don't know what yet. Do you work with any team? Any Nintendo team to compose the song? Did you see the trailer first and then write the song? Or did you write the song first? Well, I was actually kind of monopolizing. They asked me to make the song, and so I kind of had a chance to play around by myself and make the song. And then they came along and did the trailer based around that. With this in mind, it's confusing seeing how he seems to have a good relationship with Nintendo and Sakurai, but didn't compose any new remixes for Cloud's inclusion. It's also important to note that Uematsu didn't compose Cloud's remix fanfare for Smash. Yes, there is a remix for Final Fantasy and Smash, it's just the fanfare. It was actually composed by Masashi Hamauzu and Kumi Tanioka, according to the Silver Gunner wiki. Finally, we will discuss Sakurai's 2016 Famitsu column, where he sat down with Tetsuya Nomura to talk about Cloud's inclusion in Smash. Here is some of what they had to say. When we first talked, I asked, "Are you sure you're okay with Cloud? He's not a character from a new game after all." But on the other hand, if you think about who to add for Final Fantasy, it's hard to come up with the choice that's not Cloud. We could have used Terra or Bartz, protagonists in their own right, but I feel like there would be some people who wouldn't know who those characters are. But I've actually only talked to Mr. Nomura just once, that first time. After that, I was generally free to do whatever I wanted. There was general editorial supervision going on, of course, especially on the graphics side. To get Cloud looking as right as possible was tough. It took some time for us to discover how to present Cloud with the Smash touch. This time, during Cloud's development, I didn't have any instructions like, he needs to be like this, he can't be like this. That saved us a lot of trouble. I'm also working hard on a project that handles many characters, so I try not to give orders like that. I'm always fighting against those restrictions. I guess it must be really hard. From the looks of it, there wasn't a tight grip around Sakurai and his development team when developing Cloud, and him and Nomura seemed to have a good relationship after reading this interview. So, are the theories true? Was it Nintendo and Square's relationship all along? Is Square Enix truly being restrictive when it comes to licensing Final Fantasy VII? Well, the truth is, there isn't really any concrete evidence. All we can do is speculate. For all we know about the relationship, the staff at Square Enix could have been exaggerating their claims, or just lying. All we can take from them is their word. The closest we can get to a main reason why is the fact that some characters and music aren't 100% owned by Square Enix. So here's the conclusion I came to. It isn't Square Enix who is stingy, rather it's the individual artists licensing their properties. And with how messy copyright and licensing is in the gaming industry, this theory makes the most sense in my opinion, and it ties a lot of loose ends together. I'm confident in saying that Square has a huge licensing price for their characters and music. Mix that with the different owners of said properties owning their own part of the property like Tetsuya Nomura and Nobuo Uematsu, even Yoshitaka Amano for the logo design, and having to pay a certain amount for their consent, I'm sure it's a nightmare. It also doesn't help that Final Fantasy VII specifically is immensely popular. Whenever you think of the abbreviation RPG, Final Fantasy probably comes to mind. And I'm certain when you think of Final Fantasy in general, 7 is the first game that pops in your head. The impact that Final Fantasy VII has had on the gaming industry is huge, and its impact on so many different people is incredible. So many people around the world cherish this game and have fond memories of playing it in their childhood or recently. For that reason, they hold it near and dear to their hearts. myself included. And because Square Enix knows this, and rather Nomura and Uematsu also know this, I'm sure it's a nightmare of money and legal issues to get any character from that game into another property. All we do know for certain is that Square Enix isn't hesitant or as stingy as people believe. I mean, with this many crossovers, it would be hard to argue. It's also true that Nobuo Uematsu and Tetsuya Nomura aren't hesitant either when it comes to working with different developers. From the interviews, it seemed like they were ecstatic to even get the smallest bit of their creations into the biggest crossover in gaming history. In the end, I guess it must have come down to how complicated the process of copyrighted material is to work with. And knowing how damn popular their creations are, I'm certain they asked for quite the amount. I guess we can never really know until some concrete evidence comes out as to why there's such a drought of Final Fantasy content in Smash. All we can do is speculate.